Welcome to the Coaches Table Podcast, where coaches come to grow personally and professionally through real-world application and online education. What's going on, everybody? Oh, man, July is moving. It's crazy how in the wintertime you're looking at the days and you're like, this can't move fast enough. And then the summer comes around and you're like, and summer's over already. It just moves so fast. But no, it's great. It's really good. So, hey, look, today we're gonna have a great episode. I'm super pumped for it. There's gonna be a lot of good stuff that comes from this one. Very excited for it. But anyways, before I intro the guest, guys, if you're listening to the show, do me a huge favor. Share the show. Okay, we're growing rapidly on Spotify, and we drop the full-length episodes on YouTube. Do me a huge solid. Share the show. Takes 10 seconds. We are getting more people noticing, and we're getting a lot of great things going on, and it's because of y'all sharing the show. So do you a huge favor, share the show. Without further ado, my man, Mr. Joe DeMonte. What's up, big dog?
Not much. How are you?
I am great. How about you?
Man, I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah?
Yeah, dude. It's good to be on. I mean, I like what you're doing. I like the conversation that you're bringing, and we've talked a little bit here and there, and it's been a good conversation. And so that's the thing is, it's kind of one of those where there's.
This episode is sponsored by TeamBuildr. TeamBuildr is the #1 performance platform for strength coaches around the world. Their software provides coaches with an elevated experience when it comes to program development, data tracking, and staying connected with athletes and clients. Coaches also have access to consultations with TeamBuildr's in-house sports scientists to help manage and analyze data. Head to teambuildr.com and sign up with promo code TABLE to start your free 30-day trial. That is TeamBuildr, TeamBuildr.com, and sign up with promo code TABLE to start your free 30-day trial. Coaches, this podcast is sponsored by Samsung Equipment. They have been providing elite strength training equipment and professional weight room solutions since 1976. If you value product quality, great customer service, and a company with integrity, make Samsung Equipment your go-to. Visit them at samsungequipment.com and let them know the Coaches Table Podcast gave you a seat at their table. That is Samsung Equipment, SAMSON Equipment.com, and let them know the Coaches Table Podcast gave you a seat at their table.
Actual value being brought to the table, as opposed to just kind of like talking about it. Like, I think one of the things that irks me is when we talk to people who are like, hey, it's in a setting that might not necessarily apply to it. Like, or we always talk about like, hey, in my setting, how do you build this sports science department? But nobody ever talks about the struggles. And so like to really get down to the real, and I think that's what you're doing. And I think that's awesome. And it's really nice to see.
Well, I appreciate that, man. But I think it's, this and I know this, when you're in it, so when people talk, so if you're not in strength and conditioning, if you're not in sports science, right, if you're not doing it on a daily basis, and somebody that tries to talk to you about it, the language that we use and in the context in which we use it, we can quickly identify you don't do that every single day, right? Yeah. You don't actually know what it is we're talking about or actually understand the depth of what we're talking about because you don't do it every day. And then to that point, it's like when you are in it every day and you are doing it and you're running into problems, because let's be honest, you and I run into problems every single day, and it's not just one. These problems are multifactorial, and it's many of them on a daily basis. And the context of it, when we say, hey, we're talking with this sport or this training modality or whatever, or this system, we could be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I completely understand that, So the language that we utilize and everything from that standpoint on a daily basis is like, when you speak the language, you know the language. But if you're not in it and you talk generalities, like I had a conversation with a gentleman who isn't really in it, and he goes, oh, I prevent injuries. I said, oh, you do. You prevent injuries. Interesting. I would love to see that. Or it's like, I fix low back. I was like, oh, you fix low back. So you can fix it forever. Wow. That's very interesting. Please tell me more. I'm very intrigued. And so it's just like, you know, it's the words have meaning. And my hope is when people listen, I get to bring people on like yourself and others. When people listen, they recognize we're in the trenches every day. And
Yeah,
that's where the value comes from, you know?
yeah. No, I mean that makes sense, and I think what you said actually transfers really well into sports science when we talk about language and things
Yeah.
like that. Like
Mm,
it's one of the struggles. One of the struggles is speaking the same language. It's and I think it's a very unique position being in like it's a liaison, it's a bridge builder. Sports science is building bridges between departments, getting everyone at the table, and having a conversation. And one of the hard parts really comes down to is like how do you speak the admin language? How do you speak the sport coach, the sports medicine, sports nutrition, sports psychology? And it's a fine line because like every coach in every sport has their own language.
yeah.
Like one of the things in baseball, like the first time
Yeah.
I ever heard it is like velo. Like, why don't you just say velocity? Like
Yeah.
I don't but like that's what matters. And so you sit
Hmm.
down and like the sports medicine staff member understands that because they're in baseball. But
Yep.
like if you're not in baseball every day, like you have to learn that. And
Yep.
that's one of the things that even now for me, I'm learning is trying to speak more on an administrative sense because I've been a coach for I think this is 9 years.
Yeah.
Um, and so I can speak with coaches, I can talk sports, I can talk movements, but
Yep.
I struggle because I struggle with the dialogue with administration and getting them to understand because I value things, coaches value things, but why should they value it?
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm learning. I don't think there's a class or anything that can teach you this,
Yeah.
but it's a
Yeah.
struggle, man, because you're right. And the language that I use to describe things to a strength coach or an athletic trainer, it just doesn't click. And
Yeah.
and like you struggle a lot to build that connection and to get them to understand. And so, like you said, man, that the language you use is important because words do have meanings. And I like to speak very in a very straightforward manner.
Yeah.
Um, and so, like the words that I choose generally reflect what I'm trying to say.
Mm,
Um, and sometimes it doesn't come across, like
yeah.
sometimes. So it's difficult, but it's important, and that's one of the things that I can say that honestly I'm growing into, and I'm
Mm,
learning, and I'm taking a lot of failures along the way, but at the same time I'm learning in this process, and that's what sports science really comes down to is like it's a never ending process of learning too. So yeah, like I said, it's the language, and what you said kind of really brought this was a good introduction into the importance of it for sports science.
yes. Well, it's funny, to provide another example, right? Because it's funny because we recognize this with our athletes, right? Like we recognize that the majority of them don't understand anatomy or physiology to the degree in which we do, right? And so it's always, and this is, I think you see this a lot with like young coaches is they'll be like, oh, externally rotate this, and like your athletes probably don't know what that means, right? But if you say something like, hey, turn your foot out, that makes sense to them, right? And it's like, even though the end result is the same, right? Because young coaches, and I think myself included, and probably yourself in this, is like, we want to prove that we're smart. We want to prove that we know, right? So you're going to use all these scientific terms, and it's like, they don't freaking care, right? But we recognize that the language barrier is there between the coach and the athlete, right? But I think until you're in it and you work at higher levels, and I don't mean bigger schools, I just mean like you take on more responsibility, then you have to speak the admin language, like you're saying. And now you have to talk the coaches' language because coaches will be like, well, we want them to stretch. And we're like, okay, so like, are we stretching or are we warming up? Because those are two totally different things, kind of the same, but different. So like, are we doing a dynamic warm up? Are we doing static stretch? Like, what are we doing? But the coaches will just be like, well, they need a stretch. It's like, well, it's not a, yeah,
Yeah,
that's not
yeah.
how that really works, but sure, coach, I gotcha.
Yeah,
It is, like, and so it's really interesting kind of see that dichotomy, and the multitude of languages that we need to have the ability to comprehend, understand, and then deliver, a communication piece to that with multiple people trying to correlate the same thing. It's really interesting.
yeah, and I think, but that's kind of like the like I said, that's kind of the role of sports science is to build is to
Yes.
really like it really is to build that bridge. It's sports science is this multidisciplinary field where like you have to have skills in data, you have to have skills in physiology, biomechanics, you have
Yep.
to understand injuries, you have to understand, training, like you have to be able to speak to a certain degree. Like I always say it's like you're dangerous in a lot of things, but you're an expert in very few.
Sure.
And that's one of the things that even I say is like, look, I know nutrition a little bit. I
Right.
know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be an expert in it. And so I don't transcend my role and step into the sports nutrition role. But if I want to have a conversation with a sports nutritionist, I can.
Right.
Now, they're going to be worlds ahead of me,
Right.
but I can understand and I can digest it and I can relay the information in a way to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, and I do have my specific area of expertise, but sports science transcends those domains a little bit, but
Mm,
always stays within their own. So,
gotcha.
like I said, like I'm never going to go be a sports psychologist. I will go have a conversation. I'll see what, I'll have a conversation with the athlete, the coach, look at the data, things like that. And then I'll go talk to them.
Right.
But once it's there, it's like, hey, this is your world. This is your expertise. I'm here to support you
Yep.
and what you have to say. And that's my role at this point. Once I refer, I defer to you. Like,
Yeah.
um, and so
Yep.
that's one of those things, especially now as sports science in the collegiate sector is growing and becoming more of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people keep asking like, hey, how do you interact with in these scenarios? And to me, it's like, hey, like I'm never going to pretend to be sports medicine professional. Okay. I know a lot about injuries just because I've been injured so much. I mean, like, so
Spoken
like,
like a true strength coach there.
but like, like you 4 years of college rugby, like you're gonna get,
Yeah. You got a little bit there. You got a little bit.
and
Yeah.
so, but I
Right.
know enough,
Right.
but I don't know what to do, and I'm not going to pretend that I can play the role of an athletic trainer. Now, we want to talk about rehab. We can have a conversation about rehab, what our goals are, things
Sure.
like that, how we're going to progress. Sure, we can have that dialogue, but
Yeah.
I never step into that role, and so
Yep.
we work to support each other, and I think that's the biggest thing. And like I said, a lot of people ask that question: is like, how do you work with them? And I'm like, well, they're the nutritionist. I'm not. Yeah,
Yeah.
I took a couple nutrition classes.
Yeah. I
That's it.
know. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know, like, hey, some general recs, this is where we should be
Yeah,
at,
yeah, yeah.
and that's, I'm not writing meal plans. I can't do that legally,
Nope.
obviously, but like, and yeah, and so it's really interesting from that standpoint. But speaking on sports science, man, because it's the hottest topic, or one of, I should say, that is right now in collegiate, professional, and even high school, man. There's a bunch of high schools that are doing sports science stuff. But how did you get into that? In your PhD, how did you guys kind of get into that role first and foremost?
So, as far as sports science goes, I started coaching when I went back and when it wasn't really like coaching was growing, but
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't a place that you could really go.
Sure.
And it was a very grunt and cuss kind of mentality, very heavy football. And so I was a
Yep.
bio undergrad. Yeah, I mean, you probably remember that. But
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
um, but I was a bio undergrad, and I mean, I remember my sophomore year, I was like, I don't want to go into a lab. Um, I want to like kinesiology, biomechanics, physiology, specifically of the human body, like always interested me. And I
Mm,
always would relate it back to sports and the weight room and things like that. And that's where I knew I wanted to be involved.
mm,
Now I went to get into coaching, and that wasn't the area. I had an interview for an internship, and they literally told me, I still remember who it was, but literally told me you don't belong in a weight room, you belong in a lab. And that was the time period though. Like that was in the coaching. So, we've evolved a lot, but
Yeah.
that's where it kind of was. And so I was like, all right, but I ended up getting involved in coaching, taking a couple internships and things like that. But I always carried that with me, the biology, the natural science, with me everywhere I went and trying to understand.
Yeah.
And so I think that like mentally, I was always in sports science to a certain degree,
Hmm.
but it wasn't until I got to Wofford and I had a professor of mine. Dr. Bellin, who was an awesome professor. I was working at Wofford, but Dr. Bellin was an awesome professor of mine at LaGrange, and I just kept calling him to ask him questions because I just didn't. I wanted to understand,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember he called me outside the hospital of because his wife had just given birth,
Mm.
and yeah, and he called me to answer a couple questions I had, and then that was the kind of thing, and he was great for that because he made me feel so dumb because I didn't know, and I was so mad at myself because I should have known the answers to this stuff. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it was the people I met in my masters, the professors I had, in combination with the people I worked with at Wofford, who really kind of allowed me to grow into the first steps of sports science because they pushed me to be who authentic and to
Mm.
ask questions and to seek understanding. And then from there, all the professors at LaGrange that I had, or most of them, they all went to ETSU. They were all graduates,
Okay.
and Dr. Bellin was like, "Hey man, like you should apply here. Like this is the hub. Like this
Mm.
is the only program at the time, and there's a few more now. It's the only program that you can literally dedicate your studies to training and understanding training." Applied there, um, and I just didn't look back. I met some incredibly intelligent people. I mean, I'm talking about an environment where like we're literally having arguments all day about the most benign training stuff because that's all we did. We thought
Yeah.
training, we talked about
Yeah.
training, we argued about training, and
Yep.
things that like if I went to argue with people here about it, like it'd be like this kind of dumb. It's like yeah, it is dumb. That's the point.
Yeah.
Like that's the point of it.
Let's
Um,
agree with that, but let's continue this
yeah,
argument.
and we would have vicious,
Yeah.
vicious arguments there.
Yeah.
Good friend of mine, me and Alex Long,
Yeah.
we would have like epic, like days long arguments.
Yeah.
To this day, I can't text him a certain topic because it'll set off another argument. But that's where it was, and so you're surrounded by these people who are so much smarter than you, and they're thinking about training differently, and then you're learning about all this technology and how to implement it and how it
Mm.
interacts with training, and
Yeah.
and so there I really kind of like fell into it. Met some great people who really kind of pushed me.
Yeah.
Dr. John Abbott has been hugely influential in how I think. Like I said, Alex Long, he's finishing his dissertation right now, hugely
Yeah.
influential as well. Dylan Suarez, people like that. I mean, they just how I think about things now. It's just way different than before, and it's because of those people. So yeah, that's how I got into it. ETSU is where I did my PhD,
Yeah.
um, but it's the people there that really pushed me into it.
Well, and it's crazy too, like once there's an awareness or it's brought to the table, like you can't unsee things. You know what I'm saying? And so having those people around you during that time and even now still that challenge you intellectually, not that's like, oh, I think you're a bad person, but like, no, like, hey, cool, we can have differing viewpoints on this and that's okay. And we can still like and respect each other. And I think that's where the like and respect of each other does come from is different viewpoints. But it's like when they intellectually challenge you like that, it does a lot of things for you. One, you obviously like have to continue to prove your point, right? So you have to become
Yeah,
smart. This is why I do think this, whatever. But then two, like you have to see it from their perspective as well, and then you can't unsee it, right? Because you're like, okay, cool, like that does make sense. Oh, maybe I do agree with you there. Oh, you know what? Yeah, I see it, but I don't agree with it. And it's kind of the same thing with sports science now. Like now that sports science has been brought to the table, and we're starting to quantify things which at one point were not or that were unquantifiable. Um, we can't unsee them now. And now, if you were to pull that back and say, "No more, we're not doing it," we would be like, "What the hell are we doing then?" you know, like now we can quantify these things and we can start to, like you said, have this multidisciplinary approach where we're integrating so much from the actual practice, the actual training sessions, the data, the sleep, the you name it, psychology, nutrition, yada yada yada. If we were to take that away, how much would we regress?
So
You know?
I think that there's this, but I think the point that you bring up though is like it's about the information that's provided, and it's not necessarily because we do to a point, and I'm guilty of this too. So like we
Yeah.
rely a lot on tech, and
Yep.
I
Yep.
keep going back to a discussion that I've had and I've seen people have. Dr. Tim Sukumel, he's brought this up as like some fantastic sports science happened from people who used a pen and a paper. They used an Excel sheet. And that's it. They used a stopwatch. And I think that's one of those things that even at ETSU when he was there, Dr. DeWeese, he said was like you can do fantastic sports science with a stopwatch and an Excel sheet. Like you don't need this. I think to a degree we have to juxtapose the over reliance on tech and or the reliance on tech, sometimes over reliance, but also on the what it gives you. Like we're talking about
Mm,
the information. Like if
yes.
we pull back, we pull away all the information about quantifying practice loads, I think there would be a gap in the sense that like we would try to find ways to understand what's happening, but I don't think we some people would, stick their head in the sand, but other people would search endlessly
Yeah.
for subjective ways of doing it and things like that because now, like you said, now once you see it, you can't ever unsee it.
Yes.
It's now we rely on this information to a degree. Um,
To a degree, yeah, yeah. I think, but like the biggest thing I think you would agree with this is like sports science. Typically, what it the information that's provided, what it does is confirm our thoughts that we believed already. And
in
so,
a lot of ways, yes. Like a lot
yeah,
of times, like it's not like people think that sport. A lot of data I send out is like, well, what utility does this have? It's like, well, I mean, it informed and it confirmed what you had already thought. Like it just used the scientific method to do it. So
to
like
do.
your thoughts are correct. That's what I'm doing. You had
That's
a
what I'm telling you. That's
hypothesis.
a good thing. That's a good thing. You
Yeah,
know.
but like
Yeah.
some people don't see the value in that, and it's like, but that's just a first step because another aspect of sports science that's incredibly important, and I think is one of the foundational sides is learning to ask better questions. And so we had that initial question, okay, but now
Now what?
what's the next step? And
Yes.
what's the next step after that? And maybe we have to go back, and maybe we have to, but it's this continual search for asking better questions. It goes from, hey, how do we keep people healthy to like, okay, that's a question, but what's a better question? How do we avoid this specific injury?
Yeah.
Or what can we benchmark to make sure that everyone isn't okay? So we notice that strength levels in this impact this. So stronger people don't get injured in this manner. Okay,
Right.
now what's a benchmark? Now, what do our athletes have to get to this and this? And there's always a next step. Um, so that's learning to ask better questions, learn to ask deeper questions. That's
Mm.
the that's what you're saying. That's what that provides. It's that okay? So now we confirmed what we thought. Where
Which is
next?
great, which is a good thing. See that
Yeah,
like a lot of people think that's invaluable and saying like, "Well, why do I need to confirm it if that's what I thought?" Well, okay, like go the other way. What if what you thought was right but it's actually incorrect and nobody told you? Now what? Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, exactly. So let's hey, you know what? We thought this, we confirmed it. It was great. Awesome. Now we have a baseline. Now let's continue moving forward, like you're saying, right? But if
it's
we didn't have that baseline and we didn't confirm and we didn't know, now, you know, everybody's pulling the strings on the different end and thinking they're right. And it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense either. You know, like it's like there's a more
there's
efficient way of doing things, you know?
and what you said kind of like remind me of we started using Catapult for a
Shoot.
team here, and they're just demo units, but we wanted a way to inform practice. And
Sure.
what had happened was the coach was absolutely baffled by the fact that their sport was moving 4 or 5 miles in practice, and they also had the athletes would do their own thing. And I was like, this is why we train the way that we do. Despite you despising this, we need to accumulate volume. So we need to do tempo runs. Um, and
Got
so
it.
like the coach finally understood, because there's like this isn't my opinion. I'm not telling you this. Like
Right.
this is like quite literally what the satellites, like it's GPS, say.
If
Like
you want to argue with them, you can argue with them. I don't
right.
care.
But it's and so it's like, you know, like the veils fell from her eyes, and that was super important, because did it necessarily change how we practice? No,
Sure.
no, 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 no.
Yeah.
But what it did is it at least provided context, and it provided understanding of, well, this is why so and so is dragging. It's because they moved more than everyone else, which could be because of eight other things. Maybe they're tactically inefficient, or maybe they're, you know, they were
Right.
tired, or maybe, like, so it
Or
provides
the
more information for more conversation.
Yeah. Or their
So
visual acuity or the ability to understand depth or
yeah,
whatever the case may be, right? Like we've all seen it. We've all seen it where, and it typically does happen in younger athletes. They do so much in a practice. Like look at, I'm going to throw out MJs and LeBrons and D Wades and, whatever. They are so efficient when they play. There isn't a bunch of like random variances in their movement. No, they're going point A to point B, and then they're going to go back to point C. It's very movement. And what you see a lot of times is your best athletes typically travel less in total distance, less changes of directions, less all this other stuff because they're more efficient.
that's like, I've had a conversation with the tennis coach here about some of our athletes. I'm like, okay, they're not out of shape. And I remember even when I was at Wofford, like we had this conversation. It's like the guys aren't slow. The other team was tactically better. Or in this case
Bingo.
here, it was like, hey, she's not out of shape. She's just way,
Tactically
yeah,
wrong.
she's tactically way better than everyone else. So she doesn't have to. And so like that, like that was shown to me at Wofford. That wasn't my idea. But then I kept seeing it and seeing it, and you see it in soccer, and like you said, basketball. It's like,
Yo,
yeah, they have to move less because they understand the game better.
well, yeah, it was so funny. One of my very early coaching, the first coaching job that I had, I was making $500 a month, right?
Dude,
And it
same.
was really, yeah, it was really funny because I remember distinctly having this conversation. It was at a Division II level. I remember distinctly having this conversation with the men's basketball head coach at the time. And he was saying similar stuff. The guys are out of shape. They're just getting pushed around. We need them to do more upper body work in the weight room. I was like, oh, okay. Like, that's very interesting. Interesting. Okay. And then he goes, they're out of position. And I'm like, well, you just answered your question there. Like, it's not that they're not physically prepared to box out and rebound. You literally just said they are out of position. So like, yeah, we can do upper body work in the weight room. Don't get me wrong. And like, sure, we do. It's already there. But doing more of it isn't going to make them better rebounders. What's going to be make them better rebounders is understanding how the ball bounces off the rim. What angle in which it's coming from for it to bounce off the rim. Is that going to be a far rebound or short rebound? Where's my guy at in position of that when that occurs? And that's all tactical and technical things. That has nothing to do with a physicality component of things. And so it's really interesting. Like it's like he kind of told on himself a little bit because he's like, oh, but they're out of position. I'm like, well, then that's a you thing. That's not a me. I'm sorry, but I'll get them bigger if you want, sure. But like you just said, they're out of position. So
Yeah, it's there's a lot of subconscious stuff like that, a lot of
yeah,
like kind of like Freudian slips, if you will. And
yeah,
it's but like and it happens for me too, but it like when I was younger, I probably would have used it as a gotcha moment.
sure,
Like, ah, got you there. But like now it's more like, hey, so this is a good conversation. Let's continue this. Like, what
yes,
does this mean now? And I think one of the other important things to understand, like applying this to like sports science, is like that's the role of the sports science, is to apply that context. So data in and of itself is pretty meaningless.
yes, very much so.
And so like, and that's one of the things that, like, the role of a sports scientist is to give context and communicate the data and what it means in terms of practice, in terms of training, in terms of periodization, and how you want to structure your phases or blocks. It's the communication of it. Somebody has to speak the language of the data and then speak it into athletics. Um, and so now with that role, and it's hard to manage if you work with a bunch of different sports in sports science, but like it's applying that context. Well,
Yes.
your guys exit velo in games is so bad because he's not a contact or he doesn't have good contact. And so like yes, more data can elucidate that, but also being involved in the sport and getting the expert opinions from the sport coaches,
Right.
like, hey, who are the guys who make good contact? Okay,
Right.
so we know this because they're experts.
We can see it.
So now,
You
so
know?
now, but now we have the data. Now we have the data to say, okay, well now we don't necessarily need to increase their exit velo by doing these three things. Maybe we need to teach them how to get better contact. I don't know how to do that. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know. But
Yeah.
like things to consider. And so all of it's like a neural network or a flow chart. It's like, hey, we're trying this. Can we move down to this and this and this and this and this? And and yeah, I think that's part of it is that role is pulling the scales from people's eyes and
Yeah.
just like slowly unraveling and slowly bringing it down to now that they can't ever unsee that just because we can't unsee it. Like getting them
Mm,
on the same
mm,
level as us, but a different area.
viewpoint too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. It's so it's a really good way to put it. It's a really good way to put it. So, okay, for those that are, you know, kind of talk about how you got into sports science, but now let's kind of talk about being in it, right? Because getting in it and being in it maybe a little different, right?
Yep.
So, big thing that I think everybody wants to know is, okay, if I'm going to get into sports science, do I need to know how to write code? And if so, which one should I probably pick? For those of you that are listening, like, the hell is code? you know, you're gonna learn. Yeah.
So um, I think need is a very strong word. It's
Okay.
carrying a lot. It's doing a lot of work in this statement.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Okay. Should
but,
I?
but
Yeah.
I think it depends on the context because
Sure.
that you're
Okay.
in. Because like for me, I'm the only sports scientist here. Okay, so
Mm,
we have 21 sports. I think if you break, I don't really, yeah, we have 21 sports and over 400 athletes. Okay,
okay.
so for me, writing code, I use RStudio and R, and I use SQL for my database. It's about efficiency. So if you're at a high school level and you're collecting grip and wellness, do you need to code? No, you don't need to code.
Right.
If you're at a collegiate level and you're at a professional level or you're trying to get into those things, the market dictates the skills that you're going to need. And the
Mm,
market is dictating the fact that you should probably learn how to code. You should learn R or Python or SQL or once again the job that you want is going to dictate the skills. So if you're going
mm,
to work in pro, you're probably going to need to know a little bit of SQL because they're going to have this database and it's going to be a mammoth database.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
but you're also going to need to know Python or R so that you can manage the data. If you're going to work in collegiate and you're going to be a one man show or a one woman show for 400 athletes, I hate to break it to you, but you're probably going to need to learn to code.
Sure.
Um, but like I said, if you're going to be doing analytics or something for a volleyball team or a football team, do you need to learn how to code? No, no, you don't.
Yeah.
But it's going to be really helpful and it's going to free up a lot of time. And it's going to,
Mm,
we talk about efficiency a lot because sports
mm,
science comes down to like simplifying and reducing. And that comes from a lot of ways. So, you know, finding metrics that say tell the same story and removing them and going down to one metric or two metrics and simplifying your visualizations and reports and reducing them to a digestible level. That also transfers to you. So can I simplify? Can I reduce? Can I be more efficient in my process? Yes, because what's going to happen is the current situation when I walked in was there was an intern here who did sports science, and
sure.
she had a difficult time because there was a lot, and the structure was unlaid, and so like it was a very
Yeah.
weird setup, and so
Yeah.
but she was also using Google Sheets and Excel, and so she was managing this data um, in it, and that proved to be difficult. And I've done that when I was at ETSU. Same thing, trying to manage data for my dissertation in Google Sheets and Excel. That was really hard.
Yeah.
Um, and so, it comes down to, do you want to be efficient? Yes. You should probably learn to code. Um,
Mm.
I can access data at any point from my apartment, with I don't have to worry about end-to-end encryption because it's local on an SQL database. I can access it. Baseball strength coach can call me up at 8 o'clock, say, "Hey, where's this guy at?" And I can go 2 seconds, Command Enter.
Sure.
Here we go, and then I have it and it's sent out. And now I have time to go out and talk to him,
Yeah. Do
or I
whatever
can
else you need to do. Yeah.
or I can coach, or I can whatever, because
Mm.
I've simplified, reduced, and made my life a little bit more efficient in that way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's helpful. Is it necessary? Your situation will decide that.
Sure. It depends, right? Yeah.
But the more technology you have, and the more you want to add context, and the more you want to bring in, the more likely it's going to be that you're going to need to do it, to use
Sure.
coding.
Sure. Now, that's it's very interesting. Because like you're saying, efficiency is the biggest thing. I think we've all tried to manage any sort of a decent amount of data in Excel, and then you realize this is running so slow. You're trying to scroll down because you got your data copied, right? And you're trying to scroll down so you can input it and make your adjustments. And you're like, now I have to manually do all this. Now I have to manually do all that. And you're like, there's 30 minutes of your day gone.
Dude,
You know what I'm
it
saying?
and if you're trying to make like an acute to chronic and you're trying to do it
Oh,
right, like, dude, that'll crash your Excel file. Like, once again, I know some people who are absolute wizards in Google Sheets and Excel, and they'd have no problem. And for them, I'd be
yeah.
like, go live your life.
Yeah.
Seriously, I
Yeah.
am I am in awe of your abilities.
Yeah.
I wish I could do that, but I mean, I can't. So I'm just gonna Command Enter my way through life. Like, that's fine. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, so it's Excel. Excel is a beast, and it's a skill in and of itself.
Yeah. Oh, 1000%.
And so
1000%.
if you can do that, if you can ride that train, ride straight to the goal. Like, I don't care. Like, the best way to think about it is, how can you be the most efficient in your setting? And if Google Sheets is your setting, then by all means, you better become a wizard at Google Sheets.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for me, it was coding. For many people like me, it's coding.
For
Um,
me, it's Power BI.
yeah, I mean, I've never used Power BI, but if it's Power BI, it's Power BI.
Love it. Love it. It's so, for me, so simple.
Yeah,
Like,
but where I think the other areas kind of fall short of coding, though, is I can and I know very little about Power BI. I do know it's a
sure.
visualization software,
Sure.
um, but I can visualize and run statistics in the same script, in the same thing. I don't need to
Mm,
go and do something else. Like, very, very rarely am I just
mm,
visualizing at this point
sure.
now, because
Sure.
now I'm just exploring and I'm going through and
Yeah.
more of an R&D side. So I'm doing a
Yeah.
lot of statistics, and so you need to have a place to do that. And so that's what R is incredibly versatile. The visualizations are awesome.
Yeah.
You can make like self-sustaining Shiny apps. So, like, I can make one and post and publish it, and then just be like, hey, if you want to look at this, look at it. If you don't, don't. But, like,
Yeah.
don't bother me for this. Like, it's up
Sure.
there. And so it's very versatile, and I think that that's one of the areas that I like about it the most.
Yeah. Now I'll say like, so what I really like about Power BI, it is like, business intelligence tool. Yeah, it has great visualizations. There are the ability to run statistical analysis, and it gives you kind of like an AI feature a little bit where it kind of provides, they call them key influencers, right? So if we're looking at, data point A and B, and like what are the key influencers on that, whatever. I find those really helpful and interesting. Does it mean that you should ride and die by those? Absolutely not. But obviously, like, it's good stuff. But I do think there's other things that are better, like you're saying. Like, you know what I'm saying? And like, better used, better understanding, more efficient, however you want to term it, if you will, whatever somebody's more comfortable with. But you can do a multitude of things. I know a lot of sports scientists particularly are, hey, like, they run R or Python, and you can do that inside Power BI too. So like, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's just really interesting to see the different tools you can utilize and get a rather similar end result. Depends upon your context and what you actually need.
Yeah, and people will say, I mean, there's this people think it's an affront to, like, Google Sheets, or like even Python or R. Like, But really, like people will argue with you, like, why don't you use Python? It's like because I don't know Python and I don't want to learn it. Like I don't know what to tell you. Like you
Why don't
know,
you run R
yeah,
then?
like I don't get it. I can say the same thing. But and it's I just want to make it clear. I'm not saying one is better than the other.
Right,
One
right.
is going to be most beneficial for your context and for your situation. But in the current situation in athletics and collegiate specifically, collegiate and pro, it's likely if you are trying to manage multiple teams, you're probably going to need to code.
Sure.
Especially the more technology you start implementing. If you have force plates and you have a Nord board and force frame and a dynamo and you have DEXA and then you're going to need to do it because now you're going to manage noisy data from a bunch of different things and you need to integrate it in some way. You need to have a way to do it. Once again, I don't know if Power BI can, but like
Sure,
you need to
sure,
find a way
sure,
to
sure.
do it in a
Yep.
way, and Excel is probably not going to be able to do it. So
Unfortunately not. Yeah.
yeah,
Because like,
and that's just one of those things. So I don't know. Maximize your efficiency. Do what you want to do. Um,
yeah,
I mean, my buddy taught me R. Dr. Abbott, he taught me R. He made a course. People like it. It helps them. Um, R has a steep learning curve. Python has a steep learning curve. All these coding languages have a steep learning curve. So if you're not going to invest in them, then you're not going to actually do the work, and you're not going to be willing to struggle, and then it's going to be a tough time. Google Sheets is much easier. It is.
yeah.
But
But
the ROI, if you're willing to eat it for 6 to 8 months and struggle and then close your laptop, cry a little bit, and then open back up, like, and go
yeah,
back to it and Google a lot, like the ROI on R for me was,
huge.
yeah, I can't even tell you how big it's been. My
Well,
life would be sad without it.
yeah. Well, and here's the thing that a lot of people also fail to recognize. Um, these are skill sets, and these skill sets can go with you anywhere. You can strip yourself of degrees and certifications and yada yada yada, but you can't strip yourself of your skill set. And so, like when you invest in your skill set and you learn additional skills that one make you valuable, right? Whether it's in college athletics, professional sports, or whatever, or in the business side, right? Oh my gosh, dude, you go to a business right now and you know R and you know Python and you know SQL. Okay, pay me $350,000 a year.
Yeah, the IRS uses R. Every stats department in America uses R, like,
Yeah,
or at least in collegiate set. Like companies use it. It takes a lot to get to, and the difference between data scientists and sports scientists is very large. But like you're right, because if one of the things that this allows me to do is like one of the reasons I got a PhD was I saw my boss working after he just had a kid. So he came back 2 weeks later and he was still working 80 hours a week. And I was like, damn, I can't do that. If I want a family, I'm not doing that.
right.
And so the PhD to me was a key. It opened up doors.
Yeah,
And, art to me is a means to an end here, but it also means like potentially I could do with it what I want because it's a skill, like you said, and that's how I view it is I want to learn and I want to and really what it is like art to me is a puzzle. So I'm putting pieces of a puzzle together when I code.
yeah, mhm,
It's super interesting, but like I'm developing that skill that's going to help me now, but it's also going to help me in the future, and it also
for
makes
sure.
me think differently because I have to code in a very logical way.
Right.
So yeah, it's an investment, and like you said, like
Yeah,
if you ever want to get out of coaching, like you can go into, or if you want to get out of sports science, you can go into working for a private company, and you could make. I mean,
very good.
I have buddies who code, and make, they have a bachelor's degree, and they make $30,000 to $50,000 more than I do. They work from home.
Work from home, very low stress, and they work
Yeah,
from 8 to 4, 8 to 5, and that's it. Like yeah. Okay, so let's talk about dashboards a little bit because this is something that yourself, I see, and people mess them up a lot.
yeah,
And what I mean by that is they try and throw everything on there and it's very chaotic, it's very messy, your attention is everywhere and you're like, holy cat, I don't even know what I'm looking at right now. Like, what is even important? What do you recommend? Thoughts? I know you kind of have some interesting thoughts on this, but generalities one, and then kind of go from there.
So I think you have to think about it like a car dashboard.
Hmm.
If everything is lit up on your dashboard, that's a problem,
Yep.
right? Well, it's the same thing. If everything is a problem, then nothing is a problem. What are you going to fix first? You
Yeah.
know. And so dashboards, I have dashboards. I use them at times.
Sure.
I don't like to use them because then the data exists and there's no context. A report to me is a way for me to, here's the important information, here's my summary, here's my context. Now everyone who needs to have it has it. And a dashboard in of itself, you don't really have that same ability to put a context up.
Right.
Um, Good idea in theory, can be
Yep.
very useful, but it's keep it simple. If you're going to make a dashboard, keep it simple and minimal of upkeep as possible because it's a pain. And I would really, really, really avoid like putting all of your weight into it.
Mm.
Because what I've also found a lot of is it's cool for about a week, it's cool for 2 weeks, and then it stops being cool. And so that's one of those things where it's like I've moved away from it to a certain degree,
Sure.
but um, if it provides utility and it's the way that people want it, and the coaches and all the people who have stake in it want it, then for sure keep doing it.
Yeah.
But once again, I always come back to reducing and making it simple and digestible, and then adding your context to it. So in a report.
Yeah. Because you have like kind of a one pager, a one
Yes.
page report that you send out. And, when people think of doing things more efficiently or learning from people that are really good at what they do, it's kind of the thought process is like, okay, what are you doing, right? That maybe I could adopt, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that I could tweak or whatever. Kind of, if you would, you don't have to, but if you would, what does your kind of one pager report look like? And what's your cadence on that? Because I think that's a big thing with sports science too and data. It's like, what is your cadence of reporting? Is it a daily report? Is it a weekly report? Is it only post game reports? Like, what does that cadence kind of typically look like as well?
So the one page I actually like super stole from I am not even gonna lie about it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
stole from Dr. Abbott. Um, I have no shame. It's a really good idea.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the one page, what it does is the cadence will go into this is it summarizes the necessary information for the stakeholders. So coach says, where is this person? Where are they looking? We're gonna or like he's in the pen right now. We're thinking about starting him. How's he looking physically? Boom, one page summary, all the important things. His body weight's down 5 pounds. His peak power, his impulse, his everything is down. Maybe you should have a conversation with him. Maybe consider his strain and monotony, super wonky. All of it's on one page. They know where it's at. They know where he's at because previous conversations have led them to understanding of what the data, what strain, monotony, peak power, and impulse mean. So they know and they can make an informed decision now. So that's what the
Mm,
one page does. Um, it's not for everybody, so I'm not doing it for a 35-person roster because that would
yeah.
be psychopathic. Um, but it summarized the pertinent information in a way that's easily digestible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I do that. Depends on the sport. Um, Baseball, we do it weekly before games. So like guys will jump Tuesday, and then I'll send it Tuesday-ish. So it depends on the pitching schedule, but like Tuesday, Wednesday.
Sure.
Um, because midweek games are midweek games.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
meh.
Yeah.
But
If
we
you're in
want to know,
baseball, you know what midweek games mean. But
yeah.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
we want to know where they are for the training side of
Sure.
things as well. So
Right.
like, hey, so does this guy need to increase intensity, drop volume? Like, what's going on? Maybe he needs a conversation with sports nutrition. Maybe we go with that because body weight. So baseball we do once a week, but then we also have a monthly profile that the guys themselves can get access to. So
Wow.
all the data that I have is not mine. If the guys want it, I'll give it to them in whatever way they want, the athletes. Um, but we do a monthly profile as well so that they can look at the changes. So like, hey, February you were here, March you were here. Like this is where we've changed, we've seen it, so we should expect this.
Mm.
and so they like that. I did it for volleyball as well, and tennis, and the cadence for tennis was my own choosing because it's my team.
Sure.
So, but for that team, as often as I can, the coach loves seeing it. The coach loves understanding where her athletes are. She's a huge proponent of sports science. Um, Volleyball, we just kind of started it, so it's hard to tell. But what goes on to it is just essentially what's important. So is it strength? Well, strength metrics are going to go on there. Is it
Sure.
shoulder health? Well, shoulder health. Is it range of motion? Is it body weight? Is it this? Whatever is the most important goes on it. It could be two things. It could be one thing. It could be four things. But that's it. It's just, once again, we're simplifying and reducing down to metrics that matter the most, that are related to our KPIs on the field. And then that's it. So we know, hey, if someone's impulse is down, chances are their exit velocity is going to be down. So we know that. So what kind of informed decision can we make with that? That's what
Mm,
it comes down to. Or
mm.
body weight, same thing. Their body weight dropped 30 pounds. What does that mean? That bad things. So it's on there. Yeah. So, but it's on there, and we see their impulse drop, and we see everything drop. So it means their performance in the field is likely going to be affected in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
So that's what the one page serves. Frequency is decided by the coaching staff, the strength
Yep.
coach, things like that. The metrics themselves are decided by what's important for actual performance on the
Gotcha.
field.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Which is also a massive ongoing uh, debate, argument, if you will, in itself of what is important on the field and not. You know what I'm saying? Depending on the sport and
well,
what KPIs, are.
we actually I've actually had conversations with a few coaches where I'm like, hey, baseball is super interesting because it's like, hey, do you want to hit bombs or do you want to play small ball?
Yeah. How do
And
you
it's
want to
like,
play? Yeah. What's your
yeah,
style?
what's your style? Like, do you want to hit nukes or do you want to bunt and run? Because
Yep.
how we do things is going to be very different between those two styles. Same thing for pitchers. It's like, hey, you want guys who throw hard? Want guys who throw like skill.
Yeah.
Like how we train
That
is going to be different for that.
that has a nasty curve or slider, or you know
Yeah,
what I'm saying? Or are we just throwing gas?
yeah.
Like,
It's like, do you want guys who throw like 98, like north of 98 on a regular basis, or do you want guys who can throw a ball with a 24-inch horizontal break? Like, like
pretty
that's
gnarly.
yeah, like that's that's but
Yeah.
that's and then you run statistics on those things based on the data, and then you find what's with the KPIs in the weight room and things like that.
Yeah.
There's a method to the madness, but like I'm not perfect at it. But yeah, that when you get into sports like gymnastics and equestrian, then you get into like a weird territory where it's just like I really don't know anything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
It's
it's
pretty cool though, man. It's interesting to see. Well, okay, one first and foremost, it defeats the argument of coaches that, back in the day, we'll say, coaches like, we test 4 times a year or 3 times a year, right? And that's how we show improvement. It's like, well, that's really dumb. Like, maybe you should test more frequently. Maybe you should track more because, there's the classic, like, there's just so much data at play. What if somebody, we test during finals week when stresses are high, because that's a great idea. That's a really good idea to do that,
yeah,
because I'm sure your numbers will show great things, and your buy-in for athletes are probably really high when their
yeah,
numbers go down, right? They're so motivated to come back and train, like, get out of here. I find that comical, but it just kind of defeats the purpose of that, and that's the point that I'm making,
yeah.
right?
A good, one of the things that we started doing a lot was making it just part of training. So like guys come
Training.
in, athletes will come in, they'll jump, and
Yep.
it's just routine. And the
It's
data
routine.
and the data on that specific day, like I don't care. I want it to be noisy.
Yes.
I want it to be ugly because what we need that data to have that noise, and we need to understand it just so we can maintain long term projection. Because without noisy data, it's you don't understand the variance. And
Mm.
so what I want is I want you to come in, I want you to jump, I want you to Nordboard, I want to do these things, and I want to be part of training. If we're doing like an ASH test, like, and we're going to actually make that part of training a little bit, where it's like, hey, you're going to do 2 sets on a wall. We're on the floor with no dynamo. But then what we're gonna do is like, or we'll do it on the dynamo, and then like we'll just turn it on one day, and then does it matter? No, but we're collecting data. We're collecting data, and that's going to improve us. That's going to help us. So you just make it part of training, and
Yeah.
we do have these large testing batteries like twice a semester because you have to, because like you can't mid thigh pull every week. It's kind of
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just make part of training. The monitoring, testing, all of it's the same.
But you can, yeah, like training is testing is training and training is testing, you
Yep.
know? And when you just learn to, we talk about vertical integration of physical qualities. We should also talk about vertical integration of technological usage. And like you said, hey, we just make a part of training. They know they come in on this day, they jump.
Yep.
That's that. They know that. They know that on this day they do board. They know on this time it's this. Whatever the case may be. It just makes it our VBT collects the data. Our this does that. And it's like, cool. Now you've put systems in place. Right. And I think that's a huge thing for anybody, whether you're a strength coach, you're a sports scientist, whatever the case may be, putting systems in place and allowing the system to work. Right. Because we're in the system every day. We know that, but we got to get it to the point where we're working on the system rather than always in the system. Because if you're always in the system, you can't improve the system as a whole.
Yeah, that's that, and that was what kind of my first year really was setting a system up. And I think there's some people out there who have done a much better job than me
Sure.
at creating systems. And once after they create a system, they just let it run, and then they reap the rewards from it.
Yeah.
And because it just is a circle, it's constantly going. And so you're absolutely right. It's you set up a system, and then you get to do the fun stuff. You get to look really good.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And your life is less stressful too.
Yeah, for sure. Instead of always trying to reinvent the wheel, it's like, hey, we're doing this.
I mean, I just look at it as like, okay, I think more strength coaches need to adopt the thought process of thinking of things like running it like a business. Like think of the CEO of a business, right? What do?
Yeah.
They hire people, they implement systems, and those people generate reports and blah 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 whatever. They make tactical decisions in order to improve their business. Cool. Strength coach. We are our own department, right? Now there's ways for strength departments to make money, right? There are. Okay. So think of that. Now you hire people, have them create reports, create systems, and go from there. Not saying that you don't do any work, because that's not what I'm saying at all, but you make your life and their lives easier because you've implemented systems.
And I think what you just said actually brings up a really good point as far as AMSs go. Like that's what an AMS is meant for a department like this. At the same time, I think that's also one of the AMS's biggest downfalls
Do
is
people
like,
need an AMS? For those that don't know, that's an
yeah,
athlete management system.
do they need it? Once again, we're going to go come back to context.
Okay, fair.
No, like, but it's dependent on your context. Now, the reason I don't personally like an AMS, and there's some
Mm-hmm.
great out there. Okay, there really
Yeah.
is like the way people use them and how much we invest in them. I think is a problem because
Yeah.
like I'm thinking of a few AMS systems
Yep.
or reporting
Yep.
systems where it's like, hey, this is the rigid report you give. Okay, well, what about the
That's
context?
exactly
What if a coach can't understand that? Well, it's a
right.
rigid system. That's it. Okay, well, what about last year's data? What about this and what about this? Like, there's very little exploratory nature to it. But what I do think is really solid about an AMS system is it's centralized. And
Agreed.
so I think there's, if you're in a department and there's 22 staff members because you're a very big school and with 22 teams and everyone has their own coach, strength coach, an AMS system might be really beneficial to you.
Sure.
It centralizes things. Now, on the other side, like I said, do you really need it? No, I don't. I think if you have someone if you have like here, I have Vald and Polar and Trackman from baseball and other stuff, and I just pull it into a database, and I have the database. I have like my own quasi AMS with reporting structure. It's just mine. I made it,
Yeah.
and I have the flexibility to do what I want with it.
It's
So
yeah, it's both dynamic and rigid at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas many AMS systems are very rigid. So, like, I think that they're great in certain senses. I think that
Mm-hmm.
they fall apart in other senses. If you're at a big school and you have 30 coaches, 22 coaches, whatever, maybe you use it. Maybe you want a centralized location for your data. Like, that's fine. Like, that's your
Sure.
prerogative. But the situation will choose that. And like I said, I just don't think it's necessary. I think we invest a lot in them, to be honest with
Yeah.
you. I think
Yeah.
that's part of the issue as well.
I used one AMS, and we paid a very large penny for it, and I thought it was absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, I know which one you used.
Yeah, and it was atrocious.
Yeah, there's
And the thing that I don't like about AMSs is okay, so when we're talking about data, we also have to differentiate between a couple of things. So as sports scientists and strength coaches, we do two things with data. We do exploratory data and explanatory data, right? So like, and there's key differences between the two, right? It's no different than I'm going to go in the weight room and train this particular way because I want to see what the results are going to be before I implement it with my athletes, right? Same concept, that's like more exploratory, and now explanatory is going to be me telling my athletes, this is what we're going to do and here's how we're going to do it because we're going to get X results, right? And it's the same concept with data. The thing that I don't like about AMS is you typically can't do exploratory data. You can do a lot of explanatory data, and sometimes they're not very good at explaining it because there's no context to it. And so you get it all in a central hub, which is cool and that's great and everything, but you don't really have access or control to it because it's really funny because a lot of AMSs won't let you just get the raw data either because like, no, that's in our central hub. And it's like, well, it's my data. Like,
Oh, we're not even gonna go there because that bothers me. I've worked with a
and
few
it
companies
drives me
like that.
insane. It's like, so I give you everything and you're not even allowing me to export my raw own data. Like that doesn't even make any sense to me, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and it's like it's none of your business what I do with my data,
Yeah, because maybe I'm doing exploratory stuff that your system can't do.
or you don't want to do because you don't think it's reliable, but it's valuable to me.
Yeah.
And but like I've actually had this exact conversation I've had with a company where I'm like, I don't care that you don't want me to have it. I want it. They're
It's
like, well, what are you
literally
gonna do with it? They're like, they asked me like, what do you plan on doing with it? And I'm like, I don't know why that matters to you.
doesn't
Like
matter.
it's
Like,
we're paying for it, therefore it's ours. But yeah, I mean, look, I think that's with the AMS thing. To be fair to them as well, I think that's a constraint that they have based on they don't have a computer does not have the same process as a brain, and they have to have confines that are very clear.
right.
And so I agree with you, but like, to give the devil his due, like
Right.
there's a case for them.
100%.
Personally, if given the choice, I will probably not use one,
Sure.
but I know some people who do use it and they absolutely love it.
Yeah.
And they're sports scientists. So, it just depends on what you're using it for, because for them, it's way easier to pull from a system to get Catapult and Hawkins and whatever from that, as opposed to writing 4 APIs and then databasing it. And don't get me wrong, it probably is easier to do it that way than writing 4 APIs, but still,
Yeah.
so they love it. And honestly, I'm happy for it because it makes their life easier. It just
Right.
depends on what you do with it.
Yeah. And to be clear for those that are listening, we're not saying don't ever use them. We're just saying like understand the pros and the cons of using them if you're going to utilize them. And I completely understand if you don't have the skill set of any sort of sports science stuff, maybe the best thing is outsourcing.
100%. There's companies out there that for don't GPS data is a bear. It really is. It's a bear. It makes jump data look super easy, and
Yeah.
I mean it does. Like but like
Yeah.
if you're not comfortable with it, outsource. Pay $3,000,
What
and
does a
then
CEO do of a business if they can't do it? Oh, they outsource. Okay, cool.
yeah,
I just, yeah, yeah.
or ask for help, and then while you're outsourcing, learn how to do it.
Or
Because
bring somebody in. Yeah.
yeah, like by no means should you struggle with it and not get the information. I would never advocate for that. More information leads to better decisions, or at least good information leads to better decisions.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
get the information, even if it's just okay, total distance. Like, that's the only visualization from the company you understand. That can better help you train,
Right.
and if that helps you, then it's worth it. And so Don't think like, hey, well, he said don't do. No, 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 no. Go out and hire a company. Go out and
Yeah.
do that, and then
Yeah.
learn in the process. Understand, learn. Don't just live in a silo. Take the time to understand it,
Correct.
because you might say that's cool and all, but what about a density metric? Or what about acceleration? When's the last time they hit max velocity? Now you have questions because you have data from someone else, and you're learning to
Mhm.
ask better questions.
What about the number of decelerations they do?
Yeah,
Mm.
like
Ooh.
what I mean, and then like what injuries with deceler like. So once again, we're getting back to like the information that you can get even from
Yes.
outsourcing
Yeah.
can lead to better questions,
Yeah.
and then you can have the exploratory side of things where that's where the money is made. Like that's the sexiness of sports science, is like getting into the, oh, we found this, like it's the cool part,
Right.
it's the fun stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, definitely outsource if you need to, or ask for help. Yeah,
Or
ask for
reach
help.
out to people and learn like you did. Like there's so many now courses that are available to learn from, whether it's force stack related, whether it's I mean YouTube University. I mean, come on now,
Yeah,
right?
dude,
Like
it's
if you
Google. Google, like,
Google. Like we have these amazing devices that do so much for us. Like, you
I
know,
mean, shit. In a
I
shameless
think
plug,
I think the biggest thing is this. People need to learn how to become resourceful. Okay. And what that means is whether that's through people, whether that's through the internet, whether that's through both, whether that's through books, you name it. You have to learn to become resourceful. Okay. And if you don't know something, you either need to find somebody that does know it, you either need to pay to learn it, or you need to pay to have somebody to do it.
it's and like shameless plug here. I'm gonna, but Dr. John Abbott, who taught me how to code, he has a course, and it's the same way he taught me, and it's an introduction to R for sports science. Because what you see though is if you learn R in a university setting, it's difficult to walk into sports science with it, because it's the data that we use is different.
Yeah.
And so he has that, and honestly, like, it's worth it. It's worth the $100, because
Which is cheap.
yeah, I mean, but that's the thing, is like, because it's specific for this setting.
Yeah.
And if you reach out to me, if you reach out to John, we're not going to say no. Like, I help people all the time. I'm helping an old intern learn R.
Yeah.
I mean, it's we care, and we want to advance the field. Um, and by teaching, we actually learn, because you come up with questions that we don't know. And so I have people text me all the time, like, "Hey, I ran into this problem." But the big thing is like, it is an investment in yourself, and it's an investment in skill. I'm not saying that you should become this jack of all trades, because don't do that. You might
Right.
get a little bit abused at work, but like,
Yeah, very much.
yeah, but like at the same time, invest in yourself enough, and learn other skills
Yeah.
with it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that was my shameless plug. Reach out to John, sign up for his course. He's
I
awesome.
agree. Love it. Joe, where can people find you at online?
I'm on Twitter and I'm in Instagram. I don't post much on Twitter these days, but I'm Joe D underscore strength. Um, and I think that's the same for my Instagram handle. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm an open book.
Yeah.
Um, so if anybody needs help with anything, like, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to have a conversation, hop on a call with somebody, help them out in any way I can. And if I can't do it, I'm going to tell you who to ask,
Yeah.
because there's a lot I don't know.
Mm.
So, and like I said, there's a lot of people who've taught me. So, kind of pass it on.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's great, man. Look, dude, the conversations with you have been nothing but fantastic. Every time we talk, it's always great stuff, man. It really is. It's always we might always be solving the world's problems too, but but it's always a great conversation though, for real. And so I'm very appreciative of you and your time, what you're doing. And I learn that's the biggest thing I learn when I talk to you, because I have decent generalities, but I have so much more to learn still, and I love talking to you and people like you because I learn so much. I'm like, okay, yeah, I need to go do that. I'm like, okay, I need to go. I'm like, crap, like, but it's great because it challenges me, which is something that I enjoy, and I appreciate that of who you are as well.
thanks, man. I appreciate I appreciate you talking to me, because you might learn something from me, but like your perspective on things, like, and that's the big thing, is things that I don't necessarily think of. you might ask a question or frame something in a better way than I did, and that happens a lot. And so like it's a learning experience for both of us. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
it's a good
Yeah.
experience for both of us,
Yeah.
especially in that perspective sense and things like that. Like that's huge for me.
Yeah.
It is. So I appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate that, and that's that's the purpose of connecting with people, right? Is and the purpose of this, right? It's not just a hey, let's do this episode. No, it's like hey, let's like work through things together,
Yeah.
and maybe different experiences provide different perspectives, or whatever the case may be. And so it's like cool. Like, have you thought of it like that? Just like you said, like with your friends when you were at ETSU, like intellectually challenging. It's like, well, did you think of it like this? And it's like, oh, good point. Same for me. Like, I didn't know that. So let me do that,
Yeah.
and it's really great. So I just want to let you know I appreciate that and who you are and everything that you're doing, man.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, look, this if you didn't learn, laugh, or get educated in this episode, you clearly were not paying attention, like at all. So do us a huge solid and share the show. Okay, that's all that we ask. Thank you for taking the hour and some odd minutes with us today. But do us a huge solid, share the show, reach out to Joe, and increase your skill set, because if you want to get paid more, you need to increase your skill set. That's the bottom line. Okay. A degree is great, but you need to increase your skill set, and skills get paid. So, guys, thanks. We'll catch you on the next one. Share the show.